So we're now going to move from analysis to evidence. The sort of evidence that economists really, really like is a laboratory experiment or a field experiment where we control everything. We can't do that in this case. We can't create a lot of anarchic worlds and see them unfold. So the next best thing is to find a natural experiment, where the world was plunged into anarchy and crawled out of it. Mostly that happened so many thousands of years ago that we've no record of it. But one situation that works pretty well is the Roman withdrawal from Britain, which happened in AD 410. And we know a reasonable amount about it. We know what Britain was like before AD 410. It was a Roman province. A big chunk of the Roman army, it was the largest single chunk of the Roman army, was stationed in Britain. And Britain had been a Roman Empire, part of the Roman Empire for about 350 years. It had towns, it had trade, currency. It was a sort of normal economic activity, decent living standards and so on, literate. Because it had 15% of the Roman army, the largest single unit of the Roman army, the guy who headed that army thought, maybe I could become emperor. The Roman Empire was getting rocky at the top. And so he decided he'd make a bid to become emperor. And that didn't mean writing to Rome and saying, please can I be emperor? It meant marching off with his army. And to make sure he took the whole army with him. Now Britain at the time was a military government. So overnight Britain lost not just its only means of defence, both external defence and internal order, it lost its government. And so Britain in AD 410 was plunged into anarchy. It was an ordered society plunged into anarchy. What happened next was not nice. Within 20 years, as far as we can tell, society had pretty well disintegrated. So trade collapsed, the use of money collapsed, the population gradually halved because food production collapsed, nutrition standards fell. There was actually mass emigration across to France, which is why a part of France is now called Brittany. So we get pretty close to a tabula rasa of anarchy. And what we know is that within a few years, what emerged was tiny little statelets. Typically, it seems only about 7 miles across. So tiny statelets. We don't know who was in charge of them. We can imagine that they were probably those local thugs, the thug in the valley. How did that play out? Well, there were scale economies in violence there, waiting to be picked up and exploited. And so if we roll on about 250 years, we've collapsed from thousands of little statelets. We've crunched down by a process of internal warfare to 7 states. So what we now think of as England, there was no England, but there was 7 different states, all in the territory we now think of as England. And then if we roll on about another 150 years to around 800, it crunches down further to 1. That's where we get England. So there was the exploitation of scale economies in violence, pretty clearly, a process that played out over a few hundred years, crunching down. Didn't end there. Because what England failed to produce was a really viable tax system. And so those early kings of England were still militarily weak relative to kings in other countries. And the most striking evidence of that was William the Conqueror, coming in 1066 with a much more powerful army. Because he got money, he was able to have cavalry, archers, and so he won the Battle of Hastings. And the first thing he did was build a tax system in Britain, the Doomsday Book, which I described earlier. So there's the one set of empirical evidence, this seemingly inexorable process of building a state that has a tax system and therefore has an incentive to grow the economy. Was this a nice state? Whatever you would describe William the Conqueror as, inclusive and caring about his people would not be epithets you'd use for him. He was, by all accounts, a total thug.